church or what kind of religion he belonged to, but he would often say that he got his money from God, that God had given him his
Yes.
money. The problem with that is that the way he got his money, nobody believes that's how God operates.
Well, he did.
Well, he did.
It was his mother. His mother was very religious. For most of the stuff that I read and some of the stuff I saw, his mother was very religious and made sure that him and the boys, his brother, went to church like every Sunday because of what a shyster his dad was, and she tried every way to make sure that he didn't become the shyster that his dad was.
Yeah, and his dad was. Go deep dive on his dad. He was a horrible human being. Horrible.
Yeah, well, and that's William Rockefeller, who,
Yes.
wow.
Yes. And so John D. Rockefeller had some boys. He lived quite a long time, retired he was retired for like 40 years and before he passed away. And of course, a lot of people say, no, he was very philanthropic. He established foundations that worked in the areas of medical, education, scientific research, the arts. He gave all of his money away. The problem is that those were all shell organizations, as they say.
Yeah.
He would pour a bunch of money into these, quote, foundations. He was the first to do this. You see this a lot now. People talk about the rich who, start foundations, and athletes do this. Everybody does it because it's a tax haven. Well, he set up tons of them. And he would either be, like, again, silent partner, or he would be head of the research or of the board or whatever. And so he had funneled all this money into it and then get paid.
Yeah.
Or essentially just the money would sit there and they would give out a little bit here and there. And everyone was like, wow, look how much money he's given. But when you have like $10 billion,
Mm-hmm.
Putting $1 million into the inner city or building like a $2 million building to house some art or whatever, everyone's in amazement, but that's pennies on the dollar for this guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he would put his sons, in charge. And you see this now, but this guy was really the first one to do it. And he kind of learned a lot of it from the Rothschilds, which is another family we'll get to down the line. But they were all buddies. And only because, the Rothschilds, I think, probably the worst family in history. But they saw the power that the Rockefellers were amassing in the U.S. and the money and the wealth and everything. And so they lent their expertise or their experience to him, and he was a willing participant in accepting it and doing a lot of their bidding and a lot of what they wanted to do.
Yeah. And there's a lot, and this is like we kind of mentioned, is it gets weird because when you're researching them, people that really like the Rockefellers and think they were great and did all these great philanthropic things and were amazing, they don't talk about the Rothschilds and that connection. They gloss over a lot of these other connections, and they talk about, he gave away he gave away more money than like anybody ever has, but he gave them away to further his interests.
100%. Whoever he gave money to, or whatever he built a building for, or whatever he was being philanthropic towards, was to benefit him and his family.
Yes.
And he was a master manipulator. He was a big student of Edward Bernays, and he owned a ton of the media. We'll get into that in a moment. Bought out the media a la Bill Gates, learned from him how you get good press. And he would pay papers to follow him around. And he was very famous for handing nickels, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but back in that day, a nickel was a big deal. He'd hand out nickels to kids on the street. Or the most famous one was there was a factory that his workers were complaining because they were working ungodly long hours, never getting days off. They were starving. It was horrible conditions. And there was a local paper that ran a story on it, and then he squashed it. And instead he showed up one day with a reporter and a photographer and handed I think $5 or something like that to every worker coming out. And of course they're ecstatic because they're getting $5, which was, I think, like a week's wage or something.
Oh yeah, it was a huge amount.
Yeah, and so the paper, they take photos and they write this glowing review, and so all attention went away from it, but nothing changed there.
No.
In fact, he set it up because a lot of these guys had to buy from the company store, and they had to live in housing that was provided by him. They had to pay for it. He just upped everything and got the money back.
Oh yeah. So and that's what we do with a lot of things.
Yes.
He was very philanthropic to make it look good. I mean, and who do we know nowadays that's like this? But he would make it look good, but at the same time, like you said, he's giving money, but then getting it back tenfold, in other ways.
100%. It was his scam. It was his game. So again, his connection with the Rothschilds is very, very suspect. Now, the press back then, all in his pocket, they were all on board with him. They were there to promote him. They were there to write glowing reviews of him, because he would invite him to his big parties. Mm-hmm. They would drink champagne. It was quite the lifestyle. And so nobody wanted to piss off the Rockefellers. So there's really not a lot about his involvement, I will say, with the more conspiratorial side of things. However, it's pretty evident because his sons really made no bones about it.
No, they did not. And I mean, there's a lot of things if you look into stuff like, I mean, he was really big into the getting rid of alcohol, huge into that. And a lot of people think it was, and I looked, he's Baptist, by the way. His mother was devout Baptist, and he made his kids go to church too. But he made it seem like it was more because of the Baptist, he was, Baptist and whatever, and drinking's bad. But really what it came down to was, at the time, cars were originally being made to run off ethanol. And if cars are ran off ethanol, they won't be using oil. If you get rid of the alcohol to make it so the alcohol is, you basically have to poison the ethanol so you can't make it into alcohol. It also made it so it didn't work in the cars. And a lot of people made less alcohol because it was legal. So they had nothing to run the cars on. Oh, hey, how's that work? Oh, that's right. He owns oil companies.
And if you look on Wikipedia, because we're just talking about the sort of official written history of these guys, we're not in the conspiratorial side yet. If you just look under real estate and institutions, it's unbelievable. It's Rockefeller Center, International House of New York, College of William and Mary, Colonial Williamsburg, Museum of Modern Art in New York, Rockefeller Apartments, the Asia Society, One Chase Manhattan Plaza, Empire State Plaza, Lincoln Center, World Trade Center, Council of the Americas. And you go down, and how many colleges they gave money to, essentially owning Harvard, Dartmouth, Princeton, UC Berkeley, Stanford, Yale, MIT, Brown, Tufts, Columbia, Cornell, University of Pennsylvania, Case Western Reserve, Rockefeller University. It just goes on and on and on. It's unbelievable.
Well, and it's a lot of those things too, because I mean, he worked on the General Education Board, was started by him and his wife. A lot of that stuff. So a lot of the educational things that were pushed for, which, public schools was a big thing that he pushed for because he thought everyone should have education. But once again, we go back to some of the groups that we've talked about. What do they want to do? They want to teach our children what they want to teach our children. What better way to do that than to own the schools?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of people don't know that a lot of Cleveland, because that's where that's where Grandpa was from. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of places in Cleveland that are funded by, built by the Rockefellers, and it's kind of kept secret.
Yeah.
So after John D. Rockefeller, he had three sons, David, Winthrop, and Nelson. And if you've ever seen the movie Trading Spaces, it's a complete kind of underhanded play on Winthrop and Nelson. It's the show. It's the one with Eddie Murphy where the two guys are betting that they can turn a homeless street guy into a Wall Street darling while kicking out Chevy Chase. Oh, no, it's Dan Aykroyd. So that's really based on Nelson and Winthrop, sort of in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, but it's very accurate to how these guys operated.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, to me, the most dangerous of his sons was Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson and David, both of those guys.
Yes.
But Nelson Rockefeller was vice president under Gerald Ford. He was governor of New York from 59 to 73. He ran for president 3 times. He was unsuccessful, but he was basically had ties all over the place. David Rockefeller is the one who founded the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. He's also one of the Bilderbergs. If you don't know anything about those groups, go back and listen to our episodes. Those are dangerous groups that are all going headlong towards a one world government and ultimate control by, the elites, which they're part of. He was associated with the CIA. He had a working relationship with like Fidel Castro, Nikita Khrushchev, Mikhail Gorbachev, Saddam Hussein. He was both of those guys, David and Nelson. Were horrible people. Absolutely horrible people. And that's where I think we jump into the more conspiratorial side of things, because especially David wrote a book to where it was a very famous quote, I'm going to paraphrase, where he said, hey, a lot of people are saying that me and my family and my brothers are guilty of manipulating and strong-arming people around the world to try to form a one-world government and to try to bring everybody together, basically for us to rule. And fact, I'm guilty. Yes, that's the truth. And that's a paraphrase. I've read it on this program many times. I just didn't feel like pulling it up because I think we've talked about it many times. But that's the paraphrase. I mean, he basically admitted, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, Rockefellers, and like you said, David and Nelson are 2 of them, but that's just 2 of them. I mean, I think David did a lot more. He did a lot more behind the scenes. Nelson was the one that was like up front, like the one that you see doing everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt about that.
I say, and David died in like just recently in 2017.
So according to this guy named Meyer Kutz, who wrote Rockefeller Power, he said, philanthropy is the essential element in the making of Rockefeller Power. It gives the Rockefellers a priceless reputation as public benefactors, which the public values so highly that power over public affairs is placed in the Rockefellers' hands. Philanthropy generates more power than wealth alone can provide. And this is a guy who studied the Rockefellers for a long time, and that was his conclusion, basically, that, through giving away all this money, you amass that people owe you, they're indebted to you, and so then you gain power. According to Walter Cronkite, he said the Rockefellers are the epitome of the nation's permanent establishment. Governments change, economics fluctuate, foreign alliances shift, the Rockefellers prevail. That according to Walter Cronkite.
Yeah.
According to Admiral Chester Ward, and I'm going to talk about him in a second, he was part of the Council of Foreign Relations. He was from the United States Navy. And he is probably the first and only person that I've ever seen who was part of the CFR, who came out and started telling the truth and talking against them and exposing what they were all about. He says, quote, equally important is CFR's influence in the mass media. They control or own major newspapers, magazines, radios, and television networks. And it is true. If you deep dive into it, again, Bill Gates learned from these guys. The Rockefellers, through the CFR, owned and controlled pretty much this was before cable.